Philip and Heidi. Take it away, Heidi.
Thank you so much, Philip and Jenny and Philip. It's Moyer. It's awesome to be here with you today on this, Tuesday late morning and having a conversation about creating customer-centric companies. And as Philip has mentioned, you've had some of the most, magnificent companies to have the chance to have worked with that have all created customer and shareholder value in unique ways. And so we're really excited for your insights and wisdom and what you've learned from those experiences and how it can translate to the many founders and startups that are joining us here today. To get us started, I thought maybe I would just throw you an icebreaker question and get to know you a little bit better. So, what is fascinating about your career, Philip, is that you started as a software engineer for submarines at GE Aerospace. How did you make the career transition from GE Submarines to leadership in big tech? And how do you think about those early career experiences and how they've informed your strategic intuition?
Heidi, thank you very much. And Philip, thank you for inviting me today. I was really excited about this the conversation. The transition for me was interesting. I mean, in the early days when we were writing software for nuclear submarines, we were writing in assembler language. It was literally hexadecimal. And it was super detail oriented. And I quickly realized I didn't want to do government contracting. Was not the one I wanted to be in. And so I actually did a small startup that built software for special education departments. It was myself and another gentleman. The company's called IEP Plus today. It runs a lot of special education departments around the country. But it was at a time, believe it or not, when PCs were just being connected. And it was very, very early in the PC world. And I had to write the software by night. I had to sell it by day. I had to install it by the afternoon, and I had to support it, the very next morning. And that hands-on experience, and also, the fact that you had to kind of what you built, you had to sell, and what you sold, you had to build, and then what you sold and built, you had to support. Taking that responsibility, the end-to-end responsibility, for me was really important for me in my early years. Even learning how to contract things. And I'll talk a little bit about my experience at Microsoft. I joined Microsoft when it was it was still shy of roughly about $1 billion in revenue. And going inside of what at the time was like a mid-sized company, and then as it grew to be larger and larger, that need to like never get above the details, but actually always immerse yourself in the details and be willing to support and sell and build and sell and support. That it really helped me in my career. And so that ability to be able to go through multiple disciplines inside of an organization from those early years of my life were really formative for me as I went up when I went into bigger and bigger companies, because I never kind of lost those entrepreneurial roots, is what I would say.
That's awesome. It reminds me very much of Mike Bloomberg's story, and he would talk about being in the taxi cab in New York City, going to Bank of America, wiring the keyboard for a demo that they were doing to try to sell the first terminal. Or I really appreciate your point about doing everything, understanding how the entirety of a business runs, and be willing to raise your hand to be the one that climbs under the desk to rewire something or unplug it and plug it back in because it might work. And I think that's what really separates successful individuals and successful companies. So with that, would love to transition over to the presentation that you've prepared for us today on creating customer-centric companies. And for all of you in attendance, this is really a fantastic presentation with awesome insight into these three companies. And we'll set the stage for our Q&A after Philip presents. So over to you.
Thank you, Heidi. I was asked to do this, believe it or not, while I was still at Google. A really large healthcare organization was really trying to create a more customer-centric culture, and they heard about my background, and they said, "Well, you have to have learned something about the customer in these big companies you worked in." And it really kind of sent me on a journey to say, what is it that actually made the three companies that I had an opportunity to work for, Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, what really made them, successful in their journey, and how would I describe what they did for the customer? And the one common theme I will tell you is that they actually all really, really obsessed on the customer in their own way. And I really encourage people, especially entrepreneurs, never be obsessed about your product, never be obsessed about your features, never be obsessed about the money you're going to make. Be obsessed about your customer and what you're trying to do for the customer. When I joined Microsoft, they were just they crossed over 1.1 billion in the year I was there, but the year before they were just slightly, I think, below $1 billion. They only had about 5,000 employees. I like to say that Bill Gates was worth only $100 million or less than $100 million at the time, and they had 9 products. Fast forward to last year, they're at a $227 billion run rate. Satya joined the year after I joined, really brilliant engineer, and they, 221,000 employees around the world. The word I would use for Microsoft was vision. And vision was really something that was a clear, singular focus for how you're going to change your customer's life. From the very earliest days, Bill Gates had a vision that if he could put a computer on every desktop in every home, that people would have access to information. And if they had access to information, they'd make great decisions in their life. And as a result, you could really foundationally lift everyone in the world. And this was the earliest vision that was in the company. And it was permeated throughout everyone. It was, how are we going to change people's lives? When you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the highest need that a human being has is actually that, they're self-actualizing, that they're actually doing something with their time here on the planet. Bill was maybe the best at actually saying, this is how our work actually changes the world. He had to do this multiple times. It wasn't just the first time. As the internet hit, he had to pivot the entire company over to be able to take on the internet, because at the time, MSN was out there and a whole variety of other things, AOL, and he recognized that there was an internet tidal wave coming. And so he then had a second vision, which was information at your fingertips, and just catalyzed the entire organization around how the internet was going to change people's lives. He's now, with Satya at the helm, doing the exact same thing for artificial intelligence. And it's really about being able to bring AI to every application, every business process, and every employee. And so it's really, again, this idea about how do you change the world? Now, when he created his vision, he was very, 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 both Bill and Steve were very focused about this. They had things that, when asked, the one thing that made him successful was his ability to hyper-focus on one thing. He would hold think weeks. You would submit papers. You would do deep research. I think they went through about $100 billion of research write-offs. And in every business review, Bill would ask, how are you driving information at your fingertips for your customer base? And so completely reinforcing that vision at every single level. Now, in Amazon, what I would tell you, I was fortunate, when I joined them, they had just been a little bit shy of 61 billion. They're now at over a $400 billion run rate. It went from 88,000 employees to 1.6 million employees, 26 million products. I think at last I saw, they're actually up over 1 billion products at this time. And the one word I would tell you about Amazon, about how they serve their customers, what we call mechanisms, and their execution mechanisms. They have these leadership principles. And, the leadership principles at the time, there was roughly 16, but it was a common language that everybody spoke. And the highest order one was of customer obsession. So if you would say to somebody, if you were giving somebody a review, you'd say, I don't think you dove deep enough in that customer's problem. Or, we knew the information, but you didn't solve it quickly enough. You didn't have a bias for action. And so when you scale a company from just, even from tens of people or hundreds of people into thousands of people and ultimately into millions of people, you actually need a common language to talk about how you did in that particular customer situation. And so they wove these principles into every single thing, how they hired, how they did reviews, how they had correction of errors. These mechanisms were really important. They even had mechanisms when they were innovating. This is a view of like how Amazon innovates. They start with a press release, and the press release cannot use any any adverbs. So you can't say, I'm going to make something better for a customer or faster for a customer, or it's going to be, less expensive or otherwise. You actually have to just state what you're doing for the customer. And somebody should be able to read it and go, oh my God, that's going to make my life easier. That's going to make it, faster. That's going to make it better for me. And so they were very intentional about the words they use in the press release. Then they created an FAQ. for example, it was the worst questions that a customer could ask. Like, are you going to capture my data? Are you going to listen to me when I'm launching Alexa? Are you trying to sell me more things? And so you took terrible, terrible questions before you were about to launch, and you had to answer them in the tone of how you're going to do this for the customer. And then they made you do a really odd thing, which is actually draw what you were going to do for the customer. You had to be able to visualize it. And these mechanisms in every single case, the press release, the FAQ, the visual, you actually had to talk about what you were going to do for the customer, what the customer could be worried about, and then you had to draw how you were making the customer happy. And so these mechanisms were for every product that you launched, everything that you were going to try and do inside of Amazon, were reinforcing that allowed you to scale. Again, when you go up to 1 million people in your company, you have to be able to have these kind of mechanisms to make sure you obsess on the customer. Now, Google, where Philip and I were just at, again, this is an organization who started off with a pretty astounding goal, which was to organize all the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. Today, this is a slightly dated, I'm sorry, the run rate's a little bit higher. But the thing about Google is out of the 10 products on the planet Earth that have over 1 billion users, Google runs 9 of them. And so their scale is massive. It's actually more massive than Amazon. Amazon only has like 150 million or so Prime users, but Google operates the scale that few companies on the planet even dream of. And the way I would describe their customer focus is what we call empathy at 10x. Now, 10x is just being able to think at a level, when you think that you're going to try to improve something by 10% or 20%, that's not very, that's not what I would say to be like powerful for a customer. But making something that's 10x better has profound impacts. And you have to just simply think at a completely different scale. So when you run 9 products that have 1 billion users, you want to be able to think about huge problems. There's approximately 8 billion people on the planet Earth. About 5.3 billion of them are on the internet. By 2030, about 7.9 or 7.3 billion or so are going to be coming online. And so taking huge problems that impact all of humanity are what you're encouraged to do. You need to be able to say, hey, there needs to be a breakthrough technology that doesn't exist on the planet Earth today, and then a radical solution to a problem. Well, when you combine this with empathy, is when you get a lot of the magic that happens at Google. Now, empathy is not just, gee, I'm really sorry that you're feeling this way. It's actually like you're putting yourself in the eyes and the ears and the feelings of the customer. And this is a really important thing. Think at 10x, but put yourself in the eyes and ears and feelings of the customer, and make the customer's problem your problem. And so, Google search was a way to start allowing you to search easier. But sometimes if the user can't spell, then it's our problem. And so that's where they came up with spell check. If the user doesn't know what to ask, auto suggest an answer from questions that other people have asked. If they don't speak the same language, this is why they generated Translate, so that people could actually ask questions in Google search that didn't speak the English language. If they have a bad connection, if you've ever heard about Fiber and Loon, where they were launching, air balloons that actually could beam down Wi-Fi, and Fiber, they were solving the problem at scale, has difficulty focusing, speaking up, or hearing. So the little hand that is now inside of Zoom, when you can put your hand up, it started in Meets, and it was actually done by a neurodiverse individual. They brought, one of the things that they do at Google is they bring in a lot of different voices. They also bring in a lot of different developer types. They bring in lots of different communities into Google to build the products. And that was created by a neurodiverse individual who had a hard time speaking up in meetings. And so he actually coded up this idea of raise a hand. And it's another great example of having empathy. And the difference, as I mentioned, one thing I would say that for each of these companies, from very early on, whether or not it was Microsoft, whether or not it was Amazon, or whether or not it was Google, was very rarely were you talking about the products. And most of the time, like what was celebrated and what was driven by the leaderships was this idea of what are you going to do? How are you going to change the customer's life? Do you have the right mechanisms to reinforce listening to your customer and responding? And then are you thinking big enough about how you solve these massive problems for large user populations?
Awesome. Phil, really insightful. So thank you for that. Let's dive into some questions based on what we heard. So, we're in the last example, we have 10x value, and we have essentially putting yourself into the shoes of the user. And so that means that you have to have some kind of core understanding of the customer and have some basis for research and knowledge of the current experience and what you want to create for them. How often have you in the past kind of been involved in conducting market research, or how would you describe the process of identifying what the real customer need is, or the pain point? Like, how have you instructed your teams to go through that process in the past?
Yeah, I think there's early on, it was very waterfall oriented. So you kind of like defined a problem, then you did a bunch of surveys, and then you kind of launched a product, and you hopefully got the requirements right. The iteration process, as we moved over to Agile, and that ability to be able to build a minimal viable product and get it out quickly and get customer, feedback was really important. Amazon was probably the best that I saw at this, where their whole goal was to get minimal viable product. There's a lot of people talk about this idea of fail fast. And that actually is, I really hate the word fail fast, because Amazon, when they started Prime, there were actually 7 different versions of Prime that they spun up across the organization. And their goal was they got things out and they started getting feedback. And those mechanisms that they built were able to listen in real time to all of the different customer feedback. I like to tell people to fail small, not fast. Amazon, if anything, they actually let products run for a very, very, very long time to be able to build up enough feedback to be able to get it better and better. And they ultimately ended up merging a lot of elements of Prime together into a single offering. And so the best ways that I've seen are actually these starting small experiments, getting something out in front of a customer, getting them using it, instrumenting your product to be able to see what actually is being used, and then also having the mechanisms internally to move really quick. What a lot of people do is they get the feedback, but they don't actually have the mechanisms to listen and then to respond quickly, get it back out, and then and bring the information back. With AI today, like we have close to about 20 initiatives inside of Vimeo today, to be able to collect information, to be able to make things better. So we're starting to instrument all of our chatbots so we can summarize every single week what's the kind of feedback that we're getting, what the common support issues are. We're taking any kind of feedback that shows up on social and saying, about our product, and summarizing what we're seeing. And so it's not any one thing, it's a million small things to make sure you listen and react quickly.
Awesome. And what's interesting is, I think that flows nicely into my next question, which is around creating a customer-centric culture. For all of the tactics and strategies you just mentioned, they involve sales, they involve product development, they involve customer support, they involve engineering. And so everyone has a hand in failing small and measuring it and coming up with what's next to approach. And so how have you inculcated that culture, of that customer-centric culture, across the organizations that you've worked with, or how have you seen it work best? Because the 3 examples you provided were really, quite varied. So give us some tips in that regard.
So, first and foremost, when I got here at Vimeo, one of the things that I instituted immediately is that every single meeting we would start with a customer story. And so, at the time, I think we're a company that actually, has our roots in the consumer business, and we've moved into the enterprise. And there are these wonderful enterprise customers that are using our technologies, and there are these wonderful award-winning filmmakers. And so every single meeting that I'm in, we start with a customer story, because we have to, and sometimes it's an awful story. Sometimes a customer is leaving us. Sometimes a customer is frustrated with us. Sometimes a customer has called into support, or they want a refund. Sometimes there's something that we're celebrating. And so the first and foremost thing is that you must listen. You, as a leader, you've got to set yourself up to listen to the customer stories. Jeff Bezos has this great statement that I just absolutely love, which is when the data disagrees with the customer anecdotes, always go with the customer anecdotes. You know, and I would tell you it was one of the things I saw Bill Gates in the early days as well. He wanted to hear what the customer was saying, and he wanted to hear directly from the technical teams. I was a systems engineer in the early days of Microsoft, and he would sit with the systems engineers and go, "Tell me what's wrong with my product. Tell me about this customer. Why aren't they using it?" Same thing with Thomas Kurian, is obsessed with why the customer, you know, is having a problem. And so, as a leader, set yourself up to listen to those customer stories and allow escalation of problems to you. Don't view it as a badge of shame in the organization, but celebrate it as a badge of pride that someone is bringing forward either a success or failure that we can go address. It starts with leadership in the organization.
I recently listened to a podcast with the CEO of Delta. This is prior to the most recent bug issue that permeated through many companies like Delta. But Delta mentioned that all of the executive team actually is incentivized with a net promoter score, and their compensation therefore is tied to that, and it's also tied to the bottom line. That's a tricky thing to do, particularly maybe in a smaller organization that is failing, is experimenting. How would you kind of adjust those, you know, those types of structures that you'd see in large, you know, multi-billion-dollar companies to more of a startup founder community, maybe seed, Series A, Series B organization?
Yeah, you know, I think that I think actually one of the things you have to do really early on, especially if you're building a software company or a services company, something, is being able to describe, you know, for every single function, you know, in the organization, you know, whether or not you are doing payments and you're in the finance organization, you know, whether or not you're doing support or whether or not you're doing sales or whether or not you're doing product or whether or not you're doing engineering itself, is actually being able to have something related to a customer metric. So whether or not it's viewership on the home page or usage of a particular feature, you know, whether or not it's a reduction in support calls or higher satisfaction, the earlier on you pick maybe just one, especially early on, just like one or two metrics for each function and say, look, I want you to report out on this, and it has to be a customer-oriented metric. Revenue is one thing, but it doesn't necessarily tell you like how satisfied a customer is with you or how much in love a customer is with you. And your whole goal is to establish this customer love. And also, and so in one case, you're trying to get the customer to love you. Well, the way you do that as an organization is you get everybody in the company trying to have that empathy, trying to understand, trying to have that vision for what they're going to change. And so you should, in each one of your businesses or each one of the key leaders that you have, ask them to have just at least one metric that talks about how they're serving the customer. You know, and to report out on it in your either weekly or biweekly meetings to the entire team. You'd be shocked, you know, here at Vimeo, we're launching a whole variety of AI features. And we're tracking like who's coming to it, who's using it, who repeats, who comes back to it, who uses it again, what feedback are we getting, how many AI credits somebody had to buy, were they happy with what came out, what was the quality, like we just launched translation in 29 languages for any video, so what's the quality of the translation? And so it really is, everybody really is serving the customer in some way, shape, or form, and identifying that metric that helps them understand that is important as a leader.
That's great. So talking about product development, an area that I have a personal love of, I'd love to get a sense from you of an example of a product or a service that was directly influenced by customer input, or even came to be because it came from a customer. Do you have an example or two for us?
Sure. So I'll go back to actually at Amazon. We were trying to get the financial services organizations to use the cloud, and no one would use the cloud in the beginning. You know, it was considered somebody else's data center. It was untrustworthy. Large systemically important financial institutions, they're called SIFIs, and there's in every country around the world, there's a designated few SIFIs for that particular country that underlie the financial industry in that country. And they're very scared, and they're not allowed to use external computing. And so we went out at Amazon and we would ask, JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and DTCC and the big, organizations, hey, what's it going to take to use the cloud? They go, well, we've got these controls and, we can't implement these controls. It's going to take us forever to implement these controls. And we'd go to the next one. They go, we've got these controls. We're not going to be able to implement these controls. And we go to the next one. They go, we're not going to implement these controls. Finally, myself and my team, we said, we'd like to have your controls. And it was JP Morgan at the time, and he goes, "What do you mean?" I'd like to physically actually see your controls. Like, what is a control? And they go, "No one's ever asked us." I go, "Can you just send us the actual controls?" Well, we got this stack of documents, and then we went over to Morgan Stanley and said, "We'd like to see your controls." No one's ever asked us to see our controls. And so we took the controls and they're like, well, we always have to build our controls. And we said, well, we want to see your controls. And then we went to multiple CIFIs and we got these controls and we sat there and we read through all of these documents. And we're like, you know what? What they actually need is they need encryption and motion, encryption and rest. They need to make sure there's two token based authentication, that no data traverses the public internet. We listed these things out, and there's 18 core things that we have to document about every one of our services. Now, at the time in Amazon, we had about 200 services, and so that's 3,600 pieces of documentations, and you had to write the control. How do I implement two token based authentication, for an S3 bucket? How do I enforce encryption and motion on an S3 bucket? I had to actually write down how to do that. This is the test. So we created a test of how you can do it. And then this is the output for an auditor. We built that. And then we literally turned that in. That ended up getting turned into a product for Amazon to be able to do controls management. And they would walk in with a library of controls, and financial services were like, oh my God, thank you. You just saved me 3,600 pieces of documentation. And it was really about actually putting yourself in the customer's shoes and saying, how do I take this workload off of you? And great software companies tend to take work off of the user and put it on themselves with code, with process, with service. And so I would tell you that was a really heavy lift on behalf of the team. So.
It's an awesome example because it also goes to just being willing to ask the question. Yeah. Maybe nobody ever asked JP Morgan if they could see their internal controls, and somebody probably had to dust them off and find them and hand them to you. And there are so many similarities across industries, and solving for one is typically you're solving for many, but you have to know and be willing to ask that first question. So thank you for that example. It's great. Okay, we have about 2 more questions that we have a chance to dive into with you before we turn it over to the audience. So I'm going to go with my first one here is, in your opinion, Philip, what is the most important strength or personality trait that someone would need to be successful in the role of CEO, regardless of the size of the organization?
I would say a unnatural curiosity about the customer's problem. It truly is. When you take a look at most like products that have been built, you take a look at Stephen Jobs, or you take a look at Mark Zuckerberg, or you take a look at Bill Gates, or you take a look at Sergey or Larry or Jeff. They were just obsessed with making it easy for the user and like understanding like what prohibited that user from using their product, or what they were trying to serve that customer with. And so I would tell you that it's just like an unhealthy focus on the problem, the customer's problem, above all else.
Super. Okay, so switching gears just a little bit. I mean, you've been a tech career executive. If you could choose another occupation other than your own, what would you like to try?
Well, I should say filmmaker because I'm over Vimeo, but I don't think any filmmaker would let me hold the camera. So I'll say a marine biologist. Marine biologist.
Awesome. Excellent. Okay, well, if we all start to see a lot of videos on Vimeo that have to do with aquatic life, we'll know why. And we wish you good luck in that maybe future career after you, of course, make Vimeo even more successful than it's already been.
Thank you.
Thank you, Philip, for being open to these questions. Jenny, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Well, that was a great conversation. Thank you for leading it. How about everybody turn on their cameras and let's give these 2 a round of applause. Okay, so Philip has agreed to answer your questions. I know that was a really quick high-level overview. So maybe some folks in the audience will have some nitty-gritty specific questions pertaining to either your industry or what you're currently working on. So I'll hand it over to the audience. If you wouldn't mind just putting your hand up and I'll see what we've got. I'll just go through and vet the questions. And feel free to throw something in the chat as well. Okay, so we've got John out of Missoula. Wants to know if you could offer any advice to an organization that sees itself at a juncture. That would be, a B2B or a B2C business model where where they're built in with lower resistance trajectories for scaling. And John, if you want to unmute your microphone, if you have anything to add, feel free.
No, I think that sums it up. We're just sort of, we've got the luxury and advantage of pursuing both of these markets, and just kind of want to get a sense if there's, any artificial or any barriers to one particular model or the other in Philip's experience.
Yeah, I would, it's really interesting here at Vimeo. When I got here, I was asked the same question is, are we a B2B or are we a B2C company? And I don't believe in those kind of choices. I actually, I reminded everybody, I asked, is Amazon a consumer company or are they an enterprise company? Is Google a consumer company or an enterprise company? Is Microsoft a consumer company or enterprise company? And the answer is they're neither. The thing I really encourage people to do when they approach this kind of a problem is to don't think about the organization, think about the actual human being, the lines of code or the service that you're providing to a particular human being. Sometimes those human beings are on their own, in their dorm room, or, in their bedroom. Sometimes they're in a boardroom. Sometimes they're in a cluster, sometimes they're in a team. And the way that you're able to really get to the kind of company, like when you take a look at some of the biggest companies that have ever been built, they're platform companies that serve everything from an individual all the way up to over to a business. And the way they make they're successful is they boil it down to a user workflow, the actual human being, what the human being is trying to get done. And they scale that atomic unit up and up and up. Sometimes those people are in clusters, and so you've got to build enterprise features. Sometimes you got to build collaboration features. Sometimes you got to have a shared data store, a whole variety of things. But I would always encourage you to really start with that human. I think that from there, you can say, okay, what's going to be a lower friction? Am I going to have product-led growth? Am I going to have to do a lot of ad spending? Can I get some enterprises that are going to use this? At Vimeo, we're fortunate that we have millions of individual creators, but then we have hundreds of thousands of schools and tens of thousands of churches, and then we have some of the biggest, retailers and pharmaceutical companies and so forth in the world. But at our core, we serve the video maker. That person that makes a video, and I don't care if they're using AI, I don't care if they're using Canva, I don't care if they're using their iPhone, but we serve that person that's making that video. We safely take it and we distribute it to wherever they want to take it in the world. And that's true for, a big company and for a small company. So I would tell you to get really, really hyper focused on that user workflow and that human you're serving.
Very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Moyer.
All right, I don't see any other questions in the chat. So I guess you guys, I don't know this audience to be shy. I think we have one here in
Craig.
Boston.
Greg's hand is up.
Thanks, Jenny. Philip, that was really interesting and helpful, and Heidi, those were fantastic questions, by the way. Philip, if you have to take a look at the next maybe 5 years or even 2 to 3 years, what industries do you see really exploding in terms of, startups that could do really, really well?
Yeah. So, first of all, I would tell you that, I know there's a lot of hype around AI, but, we really are seeing the benefits of AI. We are in, I like to joke, we're in the MSN and AOL era of AI, where there's a few big models, they're getting a lot of press, but, eventually everyone will be able to have their own model. I tell people, to look at, to start with, and this is going to seem kind of boring. Look at traditional BPO businesses, look at traditional kind of process-oriented businesses. And when you add AI to those businesses, so whether or not it's revenue cycle management for a healthcare company, whether or not it's claims processing for an insurance company, whether or not it might be medical transcription or a whole variety of things, those businesses are going to be completely transformed with AI. And you're going to be able to do things for doctors and for insurance companies and for a whole variety of other, for everyone. You're going to be able to just simply get more insights. And so I tell a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of investors to look at traditional BPOs with a brand new eye, because it's really extraordinary. And what was a process is going to become insights with AI. And those insights then become, network effect across customers. So that's one. The second thing I would tell you is that I am a very big believer that we are in the 1980s of the robotics era. Autonomous robotics. I am a huge believer in what's about to happen in that space. When you're adding these generative pre-trained models to robotics, you're really getting some big breakthroughs that are going to start happening rapidly. And so I would tell you that you'll look back 5 years from now and be like, oh my God, there is just, there's going to be a plethora of types of robots. Someone has to manage those robots. Someone has to secure those robots. Someone has to be able to do fleet management at scale, and they have to do information. If one goes down, you're going to have to be able to start one back up. There's a whole wonderful industry that's about to that you're going to see within a 5-year time period. The next I would tell you is that the market that we're in right now is super exciting in video. 82% of the 59 exabytes that flows around the internet is video today. The internet is going to grow to about 225 exabytes in the next by 2030. And so, video communications and information flow on a global basis is accelerating at 4x in the next 5 years. And so the use of AI to communicate, the use of AI to make sense of all that information, I think is going to be, a really extraordinary opportunity. And then I'm going to give you just one last one that I have that I'm, this is full disclosure. I have an investment in this, and so I'll just tell you. But I'm very, very excited about electronic vehicle takeoff and landing, the eVTOL, the Jobies, Archers, the aircraft, electric aircraft, that are able to take off and land. I expect that the first ones are going to be, they're at Andrews Air Force Base right now, and that they're expecting to be certified by the FAA next year. And I think it's going to be a complete revolution in our transportation system.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's awesome.
Heidi, I saw you had your hand raised. What's up?
Yeah, so I wanted to add a question to Philip's last question, or response to Philip's last question. Philip, I was at AOL in the early days, so perhaps I'm dated and seeing now another technology transformation in my lifetime, my working lifetime, which is exciting. Also makes you feel a little old. That's not my question. One of the things that I think is really interesting that you mentioned is just how we are able to go back to industries that might not have had as much innovation, like revenue cycle management, which I've worked on years ago. But what's interesting is with the LLMs, it's the model, but the model is like a motor of a car. It has some limitations around it, and that the technology companies that are really starting to build and optimize that motor in different conditions, like to use the metaphor even more, in windy conditions or in wet road conditions or whatever those conditions are. And so what's really cool, I think, as well, is not only are these industries going to see innovation, but the technology sector in and of itself that's sort of wrapping around these LLMs is a huge area of innovation and transformation. And for a place like Montana that's done a lot in lasers and sort of the LiDAR and things that are sort of behind the scenes, I think it's also kind of an interesting opportunity for many of the engineering minds that live and work in the state.
You know, I couldn't agree with you more. I think I got an opportunity to do the keynote at Consumer Electronics Show with the chairman of HD Hyundai. They're one of the largest construction manufacturers in the world. And what they were launching was completely cabinless equipment. Their goal was to actually land that equipment, those backhoes and those bulldozers on the moon, and be able to control them, autonomously. And there is a revolution coming right now in the construction industry. I mean, I never, in the past year, I've spent more time with construction organizations because of the value of these LLMs, the ability to be able to work in a multimodal environment, to be able to say, hey, this construction site does not look safe, or how do I guide a backhoe through a marshland, as an example. These LLMs and the generative pre-trained transformers are going to get very, very industry specific. So as you can imagine, some of the things I described, that has nothing to do with processing a mortgage or has nothing to do with processing a claim, but there's going to be construction specific generative pre-trained transformers and models. And so there really is this great opportunity to think about these very physical industries now with video, with sound, and with basically inputs, electronic inputs. With these generative pre-trained transformers, you're able to really make huge breakthroughs in those industries, and I think that's going to be an extraordinary application.
Amazing. The breadth of this conversation just keeps getting better. Thank you. I'm going to send it over to Candace, the Chamber of Commerce. She was up next.
Excuse me, Philip, thanks so much for being with us today. You gave some great examples from your past as well as some other founders, but I couldn't help but notice that they were all men. And with only 23% roughly of venture capital going to women founders and co-founders in 2023, which was a record, can you give me examples of how your past and current companies are really helping to support women's entrepreneurship, as well as other things you're seeing in the industry? I was speaking with the board chair of the Montana High Tech Business Alliance the other day, who happens to be the VP of Global Marketing with Oracle, and she was stating how a lot with AI, going back to your previous answer, that a lot of the skill sets required for the AI positions that are here and coming, that women are very well suited for. And so to see how women are going to take on AI as well as photonics, quantum, and sensing here in Montana with our Headwaters Tech Hub, would love to hear your thoughts on that topic.
Yeah, it's really amazing. When I talk about training an AI, I describe it like training a new employee. You actually have to think like the AI. You have to talk to the AI. You got to tell it didn't do well. You have to sometimes, when you talk to an AI, you have to say, hey, be more empathetic. Don't be so factual. Be less wordy. You're talking too much. Or I would say, or sometimes be more precise. And so what I would tell you is that technology is less and less, becoming less and less about these like just hard coding skills, and actually more about the intersection of human beings and technology, which I think is making technology a lot more accessible. I think the ability to be able to start companies is becoming a lot more accessible. So, what I'm seeing is, from my vantage, as you can imagine, in the creative space, we're getting to see a tremendous amount of different, female founders as well as female entrepreneurs. I would tell you that I'm seeing, we're investing a lot in that space in our own business, being able to bring in, more diverse voices. One of the things I mentioned when I was at Google was their ability to be able to get a diverse set of people building products together is what allowed them to go and get to 1 billion users. And so I would say, right now, this generation of technology is going to make the barriers even lower and lower to start these companies. And I think, and it's going to be more and more important, your ability to be able to traverse the technology and I'll say kind of a human barrier much easier.
Okay, we're gonna keep throwing the questions at you. I've got one from Courtney King. Courtney, you want to unmute yourself? And if not, I've got it in the chat. So this would be from an inexperienced founder. So if you had an idea for an online business that hadn't been done before, but no experience building technology, what would be your first step? Where would you start?
I would get a customer to let me build it for them for free. And I would say to the customer, if I can build this for you, I won't charge you for the first 3 years. If I fail, you can have the code. But if I'm successful, you can have 1% of the company, as long as you introduce me to some other customers.
What if you're not technical and you can't build the code?
I would get an LLM. I would start training it. I would say to the LLM, you need to be more succinct. You need to be more empathetic. I would tell I would learn the LLM. I would take a problem, and it's really funny because Philip and I had an opportunity to do this with some customers. We had to launch Gemini and Bard and the whole AI product last year. The very first thing I did was I actually started like going into customers. I asked them for a couple documents and some hard things that they were doing. Now I haven't coded in a long time, and you don't want me coding. But I actually took the LLM and I just started asking it questions. I would feed it documents. In one case, because I have a little bit of a financial background, I took 10Ks and I was going into a financial firm. And so I said, take the largest convertible debt offering. And I want to know everything about the largest convertible debt offering. I started asking questions and I showed it to somebody. And they're like, well, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. So I went back and I actually prompted it. And again, I have not coded in years. All I did was I said, next time when you answer this document, I'm like sitting there coaching the LLM, will you please make sure that you remember this, this, and this? When I finally brought it back in, I showed it to the customer, and they were like, "Oh my God, this thing is actually working." And we're in a phase of technology now where you can literally take an LLM and start to create businesses off of it. But I would tell you, most importantly, is getting that customer problem that you can just try on, and that customer feedback. That's wrong. That was too verbose. That's not empathetic enough. You're not being accurate, or, well, that's not 100% accurate. Getting that kind of feedback and then iterating rapidly on it. I think we're in an era where it's easier to start than you can imagine. And then it's a matter of like, when you've got basically the customer's attention and you're going to make some investment, then you get some software developers to be able to build a user interface around it, kind of a harness that you can be able to start doing that at scale. But just get one customer right.
Love it. Very inspiring. Okay, speaking of which, we're going to go to Greg Rogers, who I believe has a question and may be working on a project that, as you just described.
Well, first, thanks so much for joining us, Philip. The Montana community really appreciates your time, how busy you are. And I've loved your responses around just finding your first customer. I think we get so obsessed over our product that you forget to talk to the people who are going to use it, right? So the point from your deck that I really took away was I love the thought of that sometimes it's easier to 10x an experience or a product than it is to just do a marginal or incremental improvement of 10%. I love Vimeo. I've been a Vimeo user for years. I used it for my last startup. I'm not really a videographer, but it really helped me craft our company videos. And when you think about Vimeo, when you think about how do we 10x Vimeo as an experience and a product, what comes to mind? What does Vimeo look like 5 years from now?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for being a customer. If there's anything that you dislike, I want you to send me an email personally about even if a button is placed the wrong place in the product. I just spent some time with the team. I've only been here for 100 days, so bear with me here a little bit. One of the things that attracted me here is that this multimodal AI is like one of the hardest areas. It's like, being able to weave together 4K frames, and being able to answer questions and identify information that's inside of a video. Like, it's a hard AI problem. We get about 100 billion views of information a year, about 8 billion minutes of video that we sit on. We get about a couple 100 million more of those minutes every single quarter. And we're in about 190 countries around the world. And, there is an explosion of video creation that's occurring. And so, everything from Sora to Pika to Midjourney, Canva, Google Video, Workspaces is coming out, your iPhone. And so there's an explosion of formats that are coming out. Simultaneously, what I would tell you is that there is the ability to be able to create an AI or video with an AI is becoming easier and easier. And then as you look over to the number of screens, like what's happening is that we're at 4K today. We're going to go to 8K later this year. 16K televisions are coming out the following year. 32K televisions will come out in about 3 years. And then with VR, you add a Z plane of another 8K. And so this just sheer size of video that's coming out is expanding. And then when you think about trying to make sure that if I'm going to send out a video, I don't know if you saw the Publicis CEO, but this past year, he normally sends out a holiday video every year to his employees. And this year, he sent out 100,000 personalized AI videos. And so it was him talking. He had your name tattooed on it. If you ride a mountain bike, he was riding a mountain bike. If you were a snowboarder, he was riding a snowboard. And so somebody had to actually make sure that the right person got the right video at the right time. And God forbid he says something wrong, and being able to retract that is really important. But we just, released, so we today serve all those surfaces. We just announced, the Apple Vision Pro support. We're in China. We're in all these different surfaces. You can get us on a Roku TV. As we look at what's happening with the explosion of video, the need to be able to manage all of that video and the need to be able to distribute it, we think it's a huge opportunity. We just announced translations in 29 languages. You'll see us do watermarking, remove the ahs and ums from you, make sure that your eyes are locked in on the screen when you talk. We'll be able to do, watermarking in so that if you have a Chanel purse video that basically can't be used on a counterfeit site. When you translate into someone's mouth, you have to be able to get consent from them in Illinois and Washington State. And there's right now about 162 authorities in the world that have AI regulations going on around the use of video to make sure you avoid deep fake and you maintain consent, and that you manage all of the elements of kind of being human at scale. We just announced that we're going to require any creator that uses AI to identify the AI in us. And so we intend to be, today we're a trusted platform where schools feel comfortable posting their videos on us because, they're not public. The state of Delaware, all their court proceedings are maintained on top of us. And organizations all over the world that want to be able to maintain the privacy and sanctity of their video, whatever it may be for. We intend to be a great steward of that, a great provider of AI, and then make sure that it shows up on any surface anywhere in the world.
Just a quick follow up. The example you gave of the Publicis CEO sending out all those tailored videos, did it work? Did he do it?
Yeah, it did. It did. And we're doing some of that right now. We're doing that with one really large financial institution that wants to be able to send out personalized videos to their top 100 customers. And so, the avatar, you can literally create a script, and they could take me just after all my I tend to do a lot of hand motions. The AI would literally make it look like I'm speaking in Chinese. We stretch the video because Chinese sentence structures are longer and German sentence structures are longer than English. And so you have to stretch the video a little bit, the frames. But it actually looks like you can literally be speaking the language, saying, Greg, thank you very much for being a great client. I understand you're in the construction industry. Let me tell you about all the wonderful things we've done in the construction industry this year, and for your business. And then, by the way, here are your 3 sales reps that focus on you. So short answer is yes, we're doing mass personalization of video today.
Jenny, can I just ask one more really quick question? No, we're
Sure.
out of time. All right, so Phil, this is a multiple choice answer, right? AI, overhyped, about right, underhyped.
Look, I think it's the number of people that actually have things in production has been overhyped. I would tell you that probably 10% of the companies have something in production. Its capability to be transformative. I'll say it again. It's the MSN and AOL era, of AI, which is email came out. You were able to send an email to anybody. It's like, this is going to change the world. websites were just starting. People were like, everything was like grand hype, and the whole thing collapsed, like in terms of valuations, come 1999. But look at us today. We're buying refrigerators on the internet. We can buy diamond rings on the internet. We do transactions on the internet. We're moving all the ideas that came about during that era. I like to say that, people were discovering gold and oil, but they had no way to get it to market because we didn't have high-speed bandwidth. We didn't have mobile phones. As GPUs get deployed around the world out to the edge, when you have, full 5G everywhere and 10G everywhere and a full GPU infrastructure around the world, these things really can do some wonderful things for people. And so hyped right now, but in the long term, it's going to be profound.
Thanks, Philip.
Good to know. Well, that was impressive. We are right at the 1 o'clock hour. So again, let's give Philip a round of applause.